Belarus has come a little in the shadow of the Russian assault on Ukraine. But as we know, many of the Russian troops were sent into Ukraine via Belarus. Belarus is sometimes labeled the last dictatorship in Europe. But as things are developing, that remains to be seen. But what does the dictatorship look like from the inside? In 2020, Belarus was the subject of large demonstrations following Lukashenko's fraudulent election. How does it look today? To discuss these things, we have the honor of welcoming Andrej Sannikaw and Ivar Dale. Andrej Sannikaw became Deputy Foreign Minister in 1995, but left the post in protest when Lukashenko began the process of setting aside the constitution. Since then, he has been in opposition. He stood as a president candidate in the 2010 election and was seriously injured when the police arrested him. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Sannikaw has dedicated his life to the freedom struggle and often draws parallels to the contemporary freedom struggle in other dictatorships. Ivar Dale is senior advisor in the Norwegian Helsinki Committee. He works with particular focus on the former Soviet Union. Dale has been the head of Helsinki Committee's regional offices in Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan. He has been working in Geneva with the Helsinki Committee on the UN, and he was also the organization's representative in Kyiv, Ukraine, until 2021, yes?
No.
He has traveled extensively as a freelance journalist in the Caucasus and has published a lot of articles in Norwegian and foreign newspapers. And he speaks Russian. Yes.
Da.
So, gentlemen, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. As Bård mentioned, Belarus has come slightly in the shadow of all the horrible things that are happening in Ukraine right now. But it's almost difficult to remember that only just 2 years ago, Belarus was really on the front pages of all the newspapers in Norway and in all other European countries as well. Lukashenko lost the election in August 2020. And again, you might say, because you've seen something similar happen before, looking at the previous falsifications. But for the sake of this discussion, the president lost and people took to the streets. Mass arrests followed. Civil society activists were arrested. Many of them have now been sentenced to very long prison sentences. And then, of course, we know what came next. Russia invaded Ukraine, war broke out, and everything was engulfed in this completely catastrophic situation that we have right now. So it's difficult right now to single out Belarus, but we'll try tonight to both give Belarus the attention it deserves and also not lose sight of the context around it. I thought that we would start by taking an example from the present to look at the past. As you know, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, she left Belarus after what was, threats against her family. Her husband, who was a presidential candidate, is in a way being kept hostage. For a while he was hostage, and now he's sentenced to 18 years of prison. And I think few of us can even imagine what it's like to be under this kind of pressure, but perhaps you can, because you've been in a slightly similar situation. In 2010, you ran also as a presidential candidate. After the elections, you were arrested, you were beaten, tortured, kept locked up for 16 months, and eventually left the country in 2012. When you see now Tikhanovsky and all the others in prison, what kind of memories does it bring back for you? What are your own feelings when you look at this and you recall your own situation back then?
Thank you. Thank you all for coming, and thank you for organizing this event, the Civita and others. You know, I had good connections with the Soviet dissidents of all times, and I always discussed with them. We exchange experience, especially after I was released, of how it was during the Soviet times, how it was in Lukashenko's Belarus, and when we discussed with Vladimir Bukovsky, the famous Soviet dissident who actually did a lot to fight against the system of punishment psychiatry in the Soviet Union and succeeded in many cases. He said, well, you had a, when I told him, he asked me about my experience in prison, and I told him about that. He said, well, you had a crash course of Gulag. So, and now after I see what is happening in Belarus, I really understand that I had a crash course of Gulag, because they are having now it full time. And with you cannot even imagine, even I cannot imagine what is going on today in Lukashenko's prisons, because people are being tortured from the moment that they are being detained. They are being beaten, and it is all done on purpose, and all done to destroy people, to humiliate people. There were killings during the peaceful protests in 2020. People are being kept incommunicado. People are being kept for months in the punishment cell. What is punishment cell in former Soviet and today Lukashenko's prison? It is very cold concrete walls, concrete floor, concrete ceiling, without any window, without any clothes. They are deprived of their clothes. They cannot sleep. They are deprived of decent food. They are not getting medical assistance, and it is happening to more than 5,000 political prisoners in Belarus today. Can you imagine this figure? 5,000 political prisoners. We have about 2,000 recognized political prisoners, but it is only because the human rights defenders cannot cope with such an amount, such a number of political prisoners. So what is happening today is really horrendous, and I can compare the experience of when I was illegally put in prison, but I cannot even imagine what people are. Not I can imagine. Sorry, and that is why I'm calling everybody who can help. Please pay attention to this. Please demand the release of political prisoners. Please introduce sanctions, demanding the release of political prisoners, because people are being killed. They are not being kept in detention. They are not being kept under the bars, behind the bars. They are being killed there. And but at the same time, I don't want to be overly pessimistic. At the same time, it shows how fearful Lukashenko is, how scared he was. He was scared in 2010. He was scared dead in 2020. And his fear is with him. Yes, people live in the atmosphere of repression in Belarus, but all the fear is with this dictator. He needs to continue this repression on a daily basis, because he is not sure what will happen next time, and he is not controlling the country anymore. He cannot do anything in the economy, because the economy is on the verge of collapse. He cannot do anything for the normal development of the society. He can only keep power by violence and by unleashing this repressive apparatus on the society, on innocent people. So this is the impossible situation. This is a situation of boiling pot. Of course, the lid is being put on. The screws are being also put on this lid, but the pot is boiling.
I remember last time I met you in Norway, it was maybe something like that, 2010, or it was earlier. And I remember even then you were saying things are, the situation is getting worse in Belarus. You were warning against developments. And now we have the situation that we have. If you had a time machine back then and you could travel to March 2023 and see the reality in Belarus as it is, could you have even have imagined that it could go this far? Is it was it beyond? Is it beyond the realm of what you thought possible back then?
Frankly, yes. It was the worst case scenario that I could have imagined at that time, and unfortunately, that is happening today. Because I knew that before 2010, before our uprising in 2010, the situation was different. The situation started to change when Russia started to prepare for the war with Ukraine. And it didn't happen in 2021 or 2022. It started to happen in 2009, when the first major exercise after collapse of the Soviet Union, Zapad 2009, were held on the territory of Belarus. And then it was clear that they are planning offensive on Europe, on Ukraine, on Poland, on Lithuania. It was clear because one of the scenario was, and then these exercises repeated themselves in 2011, 2013, then 17, then 21, and finally they prepared themselves very thoroughly for this attack on Ukraine, and we knew it. And I think that what one thing I would have done differently in 2010, I would have put more emphasis on security, international security, than on human rights and democracy, because at that time I was thinking that it will never come to the real military threat towards Europe. That's what we're observing today. But we in Belarus in opposition started to predict the war much more earlier than 2023, when the massive, even than 2014. And the message was that if Lukashenko survives, we will have the war. And that is why it was so painful to see the failure of us inside Belarus and our friends outside Belarus in 2020 to help us to get rid of Lukashenko, not by any kind of drastic measures intervention, but with the sanctions that were warranted. Because I still think that what was happening in Belarus and what Lukashenko was doing, it is a crime against humanity. So that is something that I would have been maybe shouting louder at that time.
I asked you yesterday if there's anything in particular you would like to talk about tonight, and you said you know the same as why Belarus is important. But I wanted to ask you this way. If you look at Europe today, most people don't consider Moldova important in Norway, for instance. They don't know what's going on there, and they don't think much about it. Most people in Norway don't pay attention to Armenia. Is Belarus more important than these countries for Norwegians? And if so, why?
It is more important because of its geostrategic situation. Yeah, because it is. I compare. The Ukraine was called by many geopolitical analysts, starting from great Zbigniew Brzezinski, a cornerstone of European security. I agree, but Belarus is the linchpin of the European security. It depends a lot on Belarus and what is going on in Belarus and how it is going on in Belarus. It depends. The future of security in Europe depends on this, because it is. We can go back in history that Belarus was the crossroads for all wars that were going on in Europe. We can go back to history, in political history, that the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, which was called the Russian Social Democratic Party of Bolsheviks, was organized on the territory of Belarus, and that the Soviet Union ceased to exist on the territory of Belarus. It's some kind of metaphysical importance, but it is important. For me, it is extremely important, and it shows the role that the Belarus plays in the modern processes in history. And if you look at the map, you will see that Belarus is really the linchpin, because this Belarusian balcony that is now hanging over the Ukraine allows Russia to do whatever they want, because they are controlling this balcony, because Lukashenko allows them to control this balcony. That is why it is, of course, for us, it is most important that people are suffering, that people are being repressed for so many years, that our prisons and penal colonies are full with political prisoners. But what is more important is the security situation. If there was no Lukashenko regime in 2020, there will be no attack on Ukraine. I'm simply sure about that. And when we discussed with military specialists, they agree with that. That is why I think that it is politically naive to ignore this kind of situation of Belarus and the role of Belarus. And it is politically naive, it will be politically naive not to get ready for the next window of opportunity that will open, and it will open quite soon. In connection with the war, without the connection with the war, but it will open, I'm sure about that.
But Belarus has not attacked Ukraine, but Belarus is being used to launch attacks on Ukraine. As a Belarusian, it probably feels unnatural and an awful feeling for a lot of Belarusians to see this, because a lot of Belarusians have friendly, family ties with Ukrainians across the border.
No, of course it is not nothing that could be explained by the will or wishes of Belarus. Belarus is different. In 2020 we did show that the regime of Lukashenko is rejected. Belarus is different because Russian propaganda cannot do anything with Belarusians, and with attitude. It is not helping us today. Russian propaganda cannot do anything with the attitude of Russians towards Belarusians. Russian propaganda managed to quite effectively to paint the image of enemy, worst enemy, from Ukraine. Ukraine made Ukrainians the worst enemies of Russia. They brainwashed very effectively. They brainwashed with some new technologies, with NLP technologies, whatever. I don't know what you cannot in your sober mind tell that Solovyov is a normal person. No, he's not a normal person. Or Kiselyov, or Sabeyev, or this foreign ministry spokesman Zakharova, that are using not some even their vocabulary is something that we hear from in the criminal.
I hear a lot of people find it
circles.
Soviet people find it shocking to hear him on Первый канал, on the Russia First channel, which is supposed to be the most proper cultured channel, and now it's turned into a complete.
And they managed to somehow, because you cannot deny that there is still a support for Putin and what Putin is doing. In Belarus, it's non-existent. Even when Putin supported Lukashenko during the protests, people in Russia were openly demonstrating their support towards Belarusian people. It's different situation, of course. But what I wanted to say that it is the situation is quite favorable for changes in Belarus. We have a nation. The whole world saw the nation. You have flags. Nobody knew probably about Belarusian flags. Not many people in Norway before 2020. Now I see the Belarusian flags, thank you, everywhere together with Ukrainian flags. And it is very encouraging.
I think everybody found it very inspiring and awe-inspiring to see the way that people were protesting.
Absolutely.
Lukashenko is not the only dictator in the former Soviet Union. There are some of them that remain for so long that it's like you have difficulties imagining the country without them, and people get a kind of a shock when they suddenly disappear. We had when Karimov died in Uzbekistan, there were actually reforms that followed, not complete reforms, but there are changes. Nazarbayev, he was, he resigned or was removed, depending on how you view it, and some reforms have come, small ones. At the same time, you have Turkmenistan's dictator died, and they got a new one who was practically the same. Almost nothing changed. If anything, it got a little bit worse. How much does Lukashenko matter for Belarus, really? Is the problem maybe something larger than him? And some evil tongues would say, that people get the leadership they deserve. I don't think so. That's the case in Belarus, because we've seen what people do in the streets and how they protest against it. But
No, these stereotypes do not work anymore. Cuban people also deserve this kind of, or Nicaragua, or I don't know. There are many countries in the world. People do not deserve, and Iran. Look at Iran. People are dying. They want freedom. Do they deserve this regime of mullahs? No.
But if you could surgically just remove Lukashenko, is all the issues are gone with him? I mean, there's a system around him that still exists.
Yeah, and that is also why we are different from Russia, which is also becoming a dictatorship, already became a dictatorship. I only object for Russia to being called not Lukashenko being called not the last dictatorship of Europe, because there is Putin. Russia is not Europe. And it has proven remarkably that it is not Europe. It has nothing to do with Europe at all. So, the system is different. In Belarus, it is centered around one person. And he is really controlling everything. And you cannot do anything in Belarus without Lukashenko's permission. You cannot do business in Belarus without his permission. That is why when this central figure is removed, system is bound to collapse. When you remove Putin, I'm not sure. Because we have thugs even more dangerous than Putin, who are thirsty, power thirsty, to take Prigozhin or Girkin or Kadyrov or others. There are a lot of criminals there. In Belarus, there are a lot of criminals around Lukashenko, but here the centerpiece. The pyramid will collapse, is bound to collapse. I don't know how it will happen, but I know that we have to be ready, because we cannot afford ourselves to miss this moment. We have to prepare this moment first, and then use it.
I was watching when Tikhanovsky was still a free man. I used to watch his YouTube channel. And they were really very funny, a lot of those videos. I remember once he goes to some village in Belarus, and Lukashenko is supposed to come there, and people are burning the grass and they're fixing the roads and all this. And he goes around and he does an interview with some pigs that he meets. There are lots of stuff that it's actually very good comedy. Is it still possible to use humor to fight a dictator like Lukashenko, or is it now gone so far that we are beyond even humor anymore? The things that are happening in Ukraine and the things that are happening in Belarus are now so serious and so awful that it's simply not. It's hard to find anything to laugh about anymore.
The problem is that you cannot out-clown Lukashenko.
Yeah.
It's simply impossible. Yes. The absurdity, the lies, and the what he is doing, he's famous, and I will show you from where the attack on Belarus was prepared. He is a dictator. He is a ruthless dictator. He is murderer, but he is a meme. He is an internet meme. So it is very difficult to use this weapon against stupidity. Against stupidity, the gods themselves contend in vain, as we know. So I think that, exposure, yes. And I think it is, you are right, the situation is so horrible that we need to two-track approach. We need to send the message, those who are outside Belarus, to those who are in prisons, to their relatives, of encouragement. At the same time, we need to send the message to the democratic world about the desperate situation that we're facing now in Belarus, and about the necessity to use whatever instruments and leverage is at the Western disposal, and there is a lot starting from the money to help release the people and to help us to get rid of this dictatorship.
I asked, there's an organization called Solibel, it's Solidarity with Belarus in Norway.
Here they are.
Yes, they are. About if they had any good suggestions for questions for you. And one of the questions was, of course, what the West can do to help in the current situation. And I was wondering if, along with that, if you could say something also about what we can learn from the past, about what mistakes the West has made in the past in terms of not helping. There's what have we done wrong before, and what should we learn from that when trying to help in the future?
The worst mistake of the West was to lift sanctions when the conditions were not met. And the worst case was when the sanctions were lifted in 2015 after they were introduced under three conditions. Neither of these conditions was met in full. There was partly political prisoners were partly released, but there was no rehabilitation, and repression didn't stop. And it was clear that it happens all the time. It's the same mistake that is being repeated, but it is becoming more and more dangerous, even lethal, as the latest events show us. Because every softening of the position on human rights, on crimes, on political matters, on tortures, means carte blanche for Lukashenko to proceed with such a ferocity that we're observing today. So I was sure, and we discussed it with our friend, when the sanctions were lifted, because everybody wanted to go back to business as usual. Dictatorships are very lucrative, let us admit it. Dictatorships are very good situations for business. Dirty money, easy money, you can hide whatever you want, your profit, and a lot of people are being seduced by such a situation. They don't understand that they will have to pay after that. I met several foreign businessmen in prison and in colonies that were there because they were robbed of their business, but in the first year or two they were making easy money, and that was quite attractive. So the sanctions were lifted, business started, and the people starting to come to Belarus on a very high level, including politicians, including some foreign ministers and even prime ministers. And we knew that it will end very badly. At the same time, we were trying to get ready for the new wave of protest, despite the repression that is started to follow again. But all this pattern, I call it a pendulum. When you introduce this pendulum policy towards dictators, you will face more and more serious consequences. All this policy eventually led to the war of Russia against Ukraine. Because if you introduce sanctions, please stay to your own principles. Because the West thing is that you are not complying with your own principles. If European Union says that, okay, do this and then we lift sanctions. Lukashenko says, no, you lift sanctions, then I will think, okay, agree with you. then the situation, look at the situation in the world. We have, starting from, for the last 15 years already, we have a downgrading of democracy according to the estimates of Freedom House that are observing the situation. And it is becoming dangerous. The democracy is really in a very balanced, very precarious position today because of the war in Ukraine, because of the inability to take measures before to prevent this war, and inability to follow with stronger measures today to stop this war.
There's a Norwegian company, Gjøre, which was present in Belarus for a long time, and they struggled back and forth with the decision about whether to stay or should I stay or should I go? And the opposition, they demanded that they should leave and take a break, come back. Eventually they did leave, but it was, there was almost no choice anymore. Do you think should they have left earlier? And
Definitely.
would it have mattered if they did?
Definitely, they should have left earlier, and I talked to them about that, and we discussed it, and then they should have left earlier, and the West, the European Union, should have introduced sanctions earlier, and that could have helped in 2020 if they were. Even when I was arrested and put in jail, the European Union reacted faster. In 2 months, they had sanctions introduced against officials, and that they started to take more measures to sanction the regime, and it helped us. It helped us to survive in prison. And but 2020 was really, I'm still puzzled why they were allowing Lukashenko to do with the innocent people what he did. Yara should have left, of course, and I think that it should have sent the signal to other exporters, not only of potash but other things, to do so. And I still think that if you want to get future for business in Belarus, you have to help us to get rid of the regime, then you will be respected. Otherwise, the history doesn't forgive the mistakes. Maybe the mistake of Yara is not a great one, but I give you one example. Yes, Yara hesitated, and actually there were some people who were from the opposition who were against Yara leaving, and one of them was the Congress of Independent Trade Unions and its chairman, Alexander Yarashuk. We were even fighting with him because he took a very strong position in support of Yara presence, and knowing that Yara was very important source of income for Lukashenko's regime. Now he is in prison. Now he is in prison. I think it's a very vivid example of flexibility during dictatorship. You cannot be flexible. You cannot stay in between the sides, because the situation is about, the question is about people's lives. It is as simple as that, as grave as that, as dangerous as that. And you simply cannot fluctuate and saying that, okay, let us try to soften our position. Maybe he can be negotiated. No, he cannot. I think for almost 30 years, he's proven that he will not change, simply not change.
So the brutality in Belarus is growing worse, but maybe the reactions from the outside world also need to become stronger. Yep. There was a time when some kind of diplomatic expression, we are deeply concerned that news actually could have an effect. Now they are often just ridiculed. Do we have to come up with new ways to put pressure on Belarus? The old stuff, they are growing immune to it somehow.
I tell you more. Only you can help us, because Lukashenko destroyed every legal and factual, practical possibility in Belarus to protect any human rights, any person, even of his own. The situation is getting more and more dangerous because he is introducing more and more amendments to the practice of death penalty. And people, the lawyers of, just yesterday, the lawyers of some prominent political prisoners were arrested. There is no way to help. People are being arrested and put in prison for helping the families of the political prisoners. So we could have, I think that the Belarusians did demonstrate that they're courageous people, but you cannot regularly organize uprising in the concentration camp. It's simply impossible, because we are guarded with arms and people are being shot at and killed. So the only way to try to change the situation is from outside. And you are right, there could be more innovative methods. Because again, he still depends on the money from Europe. Unfortunately, look at the figures, and the trade turnover with Europe is growing, despite all the sanctions. There are so many loopholes. Besides, Russia is avoiding sanctions with the help of Lukashenko regime. Now they're talking about, again, lifting sanctions from mineral fertilizers, from potash, to allow the people who are threatened by hunger in the world. Who cares about Belarus? Let's help the people who are now hungry, because UN program, the food program cannot cope with the hunger. The number keeps growing. Why keep this UN program? Let's give the dictators who can solve this issue. No, that it's. I'm not joking, because it's very. Those are very painful jokes, because there is a lot of leverage. Take stock of this leverage. Look at the diplomatic relations. Why there are embassies still in Russia, in Belarus? Why Ukraine is keeping embassy in Belarus, for example, not only the Western countries? We need channels of communication. Communication with whom? Before, we did see the support of the diplomatic corps. They were present during the trials. They were helping families. Today they are restricted. They can't do much. So why not stop this relationship? Why not put very clear, only one condition: release all political prisoners, will lift the sanctions. Release all political prisoners, will renew the diplomatic relations. Release the political prisoners, will help you to reform economy, which he doesn't need.
Yeah.
So yes, you're absolutely right, and I'm very happy that you are telling this.
We're going to have at the end 10 minutes for questions from the audience, but I want to ask you a final thing. Next year you turn 70, I believe.
Thank you for revealing my age.
You're 6 months older than Lukashenko. But the regime is not going to topple this week, I fear, and the war is not going to end this week either. Realistically, I mean, you've been out of the country for quite some time. Realistically, do you think you will be able to return to Belarus at some point?
I'm doing everything to do this. I'm telling you, I just was asked this question, I don't know how many times, even today 2 times.
Depressing question, but
no,
or could be optimistic.
I may be wrong, I may be stupid, but I'm not living in Poland. I'm staying in Poland. I'm a diplomat. I'm a career diplomat. Here's my favorite Norwegian diplomat, Steinar Gill, who was ambassador in Azerbaijan, who was knew what was going on in Belarus in the 90s, in the 200, and he understands me. I consider it to be a posting.
You were in Switzerland, I think, for a while, right?
Yeah. I consider it to be a posting. I'm posted outside to help the country. That's what diplomats are doing.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that we will return, because the dictators, no matter how strong they want to create that they are machos, that they are really strong men, they're cowards, all of them, and their end is predictable, very predictable. I don't know any other examples in history. Yes, it may take a long time. That is disappointing. That is painful. That is difficult to digest. But I think that I'm living with more peace with my conscience than Lukashenko, for example. 'Cause I do have my country. He doesn't have any country. He tried to have Russia. Even Russia is rejecting him now. They're taking him as their puppet. So the answer is definitely yes.
On that optimistic note, we'll have questions from the audience. We have time for that also. I guess somebody has to hand out the microphone to... Bård has the microphone, right?
Ambassador Gill wants to ask the question.
Thank you, Andrej, for an interesting story about what has happened in your life and your experience with the Belarusian authorities and Lukashenko. My question is concerning the present-day situation with the war in Ukraine. I think it is apparent that Putin is exerting pressure on Lukashenko to join the war, to send Belarusian troops into Ukraine. Do you think that is a realistic perspective? Is there any possibility that Lukashenko will do this? And if he does it, will the troops follow order? Are the Belarusian armed forces loyal to Lukashenko? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Putin can give order and Lukashenko will have to obey this order. He is doing everything not to receive this order. That is why he is trying to be as useful to Putin. And today he is, it's very interesting, it's my observation that Lukashenko is playing a role of a shrink for Putin. Why they're meeting so often? Because for military decisions, Putin doesn't need Lukashenko's consent. They attacked Ukraine without, I don't think that they informed Lukashenko about the 24th of February and all the other missiles attacks. He needs somebody to say that he is great. If he puts Lavrov, and Lavrov will say that Putin is great, everybody will be laughing. Everybody is laughing at Lukashenko, but that is some background for Putin to consider that he is something better than Lukashenko. That's my version of why they meet it so often. But you can observe it yourselves when they meet on the 6th of April, yet again. Lukashenko is afraid to give this order, and I think that both the protest activities of 2020, prevent this, not prevent that, are the factors that why he is reluctant. Then the number, not a very big, but still a visible number of Belarusian volunteers fighting in Ukraine for Belarus, which is, there are not that many, but judging by the mentions that Lukashenko and KGB give them, they are scared. Third, he knows that it will near his end if he gives this order, and it will be, he's already a legitimate target for Ukrainian armed forces. If he gives this order, nothing can save them. Ukrainians can can do whatever they need to do from military point of view, with the installations, with the equipment, with the armaments, and with the troops. Attack them, bomb them, whatever. And they indicated that they are getting ready for this. The question if they obey the order, today no. Because, and that is another factor why he is afraid to give this order, because today's army, soldiers, privates, consist of those people who protested in 2020. And to give these people orders, and these people are already armed, to go across the border and fight with Ukrainians whom they support, means that Lukashenko pretty sure where the arms will be directed at. It's different with the top brass, different with the leadership of the army, because they are pro-Russian, they are more favorable towards Kremlin than towards Lukashenko regime. So that is the situation today, and it is very shaky balance, but it is it is what is happening today.
I would like to kind of follow up that one with another kind of scenario. Isn't it the chance that this situation might, to some extent, help to strengthen Lukashenko? That he can now say that either it's me or you'll be taken over by Russia and you will have to go to fight in Ukraine. But well, as long as I am here in power, that won't happen. Just curious.
That was his policy for all these years. I'm the only one who can guard you and keep Belarus independent. And this kind of message was rejected by the people in 2020. He's a compulsive liar. And but when he is in a difficult situation, he starts to tell the truth. For example, when he goes to Moscow and he doesn't get what he needs, he comes back and starts to complain about Putin, about Kremlin, about advisors of Putin, whatever. That's the truth. So you have to watch for this. Otherwise, he's compulsive lie. He tried to, and still tries to portray himself as the protector of independence, which is another lie, because nobody did more to sell the sovereignty and independence of Belarus to Kremlin than Lukashenko.
Okay. Yes, one more here.
Yes, thank you very much. And I wonder, the power in Belarus is not separated. So I wonder about your opinion on how Belarus can change political system to truth democratic. What do you think? Because, and can, for example, election of a president with absolute power, as Lukashenko has now, and in a country without democratic constitution, be democratic? What do you think?
Of course not. You answered yourself. With the president, executive branch having all the power, there is no elections, and the elections are impossible. And of course, you answered in your question. You answered this. We need separation of power, absolutely. Yeah.
That is why my question: why did you participate in president election in 2010? And why Tikhanovskaya say that it is democratic election?
I don't know why ask Tikhanovskaya. I can tell you because I explained it extensively, all that, and still explaining and see nothing wrong in this. I did not participate in the election as per se as election. I did participate in the political campaign that was connected with the election. I was against participating in any level of elections, parliamentary, local elections, because they do not matter. Absolutely. The power, as you said, is completely the legislative power, and the local power are completely controlled by the regime. But the only campaign when we could challenge the dictator is the so-called presidential election. And what I needed and what I achieved actually, to show that Lukashenko does not have any support. And it was visible. Because in 2010, what we saw in 2020 started in 2010, because people were getting involved. Before that, they were observing in 2001 election, in 2006 election. They were observing and waiting. Belarusians are smart. They say, okay, if opposition wins, then we can support it. If not, maybe we'll stay neutral. But then they saw that the situation was worse. And in 2010, they started to get involved. And I had so many promises, of course, even from people from the power ministries that we will help you. But unfortunately, okay, but it's a different story. So I didn't participate. I wanted to show that he has not support. I wanted to show together with my colleagues and partners in these elections that we have electorally, we were winning electorally, that more people voted for us, for all of us, than for Lukashenko. That was true. That he has no right to become a president again, even with, because at least second round had to be held in 2010. And we did achieve it, because, it's a long way. I prefer not to think about how many years I'm posted outside Belarus. But I do accept it. It's a long way. Some people are lucky to get rid
No
of...
salary from mid anymore.
Judas salary. Because some people are lucky to get rid of somebody has to go the hard way, like Poland, yeah? Poland went the hard way, and then it was easier for Czechoslovakia, for Hungary, for even for Eastern Germany to follow. Poland sacrificed, and they sacrificed for many years. Yeah, I admire the courage. I know many dissidents from all these countries of Eastern Europe. But I know also, I'm living in Poland, I'm meeting with these people, that they sacrificed a lot before 89 happened. Starting from 68, when the students demonstrated after the Mickiewicz performance of Dziady of Mickiewicz, and then in 70 when in Gdańsk the people were killed. And that is why the Velvet Revolution followed immediately in Czechoslovakia. Yes, there was Jan Palach, but the number of victims compared to Poland was much less. So then today Ukrainians are sacrificing their lives for us. We are the next ones. We are also sacrificing. And that's what I call the next wave of liberation of Eastern Europe. Because we need Georgia, Azerbaijan, Armenia, Moldova, all these countries to become free of Russia, of Russian influence, of dictatorial regimes. And that is why Ukrainians were lucky in 2004. They didn't, unfortunately, miss their chance. I cannot blame them because, again, we have, all of us have our own passes. One of my favorite quote is from Ernesto Sabato, Argentinian novelist, writer, and philosopher. He said that the past never ends simultaneously for everyone. So,
I have one question. Can I take that liberty? Because what happens when a dictatorship falls? There are different experiences. If you look at Russia, some would claim that one of the tragedies that happened was that there was no real legal consequences for the old criminal system, and that it was taken over by a new criminal system. So what are your thoughts about if Lukashenko and his regime falls and something much better comes in place? How would you go about not making the Russian mistake, or if it is a mistake, and also there are other challenges. If you look at East Germany when it fell, they had challenges at the universities, the legal scholars. You know, a lot of the educational infrastructure and the legal infrastructure was broken, was created by propagandists and so on, and you had to build up things from the bottom again, and they did not in Russia. So what are your thoughts about? Have you thought about well, how to go about to change the system and that it stays that way?
sorry to say, but Russia is not the correct example. Because whatever system is destroyed and whatever slogans of democracy are being proclaimed, Russia remains imperialistic, Russia remains aggressive, even among the liberal Democrats in Russia. I know that very well from my own experience. Russia, when it never became democratic, but when it started to discover democracy, they immediately started to preach everybody. And they managed to persuade Americans and Europeans that we are now the standard of democracy. And all democracy in other countries, in our former periphery, will come from Russia. And that was their message. And that is why we were fighting with this for quite a long time, because Russia said, I remember even American ambassador was telling us, but why you not liking Putin? Because Putin is a democratically elected leader. He will manage to help you to get rid of Lukashenko. He will bring democracy to Russia. it is the understanding of, you know, as we discussed it today, it was still, as I call it, Fukuyama's syndrome. That, okay, the history ended and we will live in paradise, and that's why we can do business and do whatever they want. Russia, Belarus, Ukraine, and others are doomed to be democratic. No, we are doomed to be under the imperial influence of Russia for a long time, as long as we get rid of this. So it is not an example. What is an example for us is Poland, Czechia, Slovakia, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Romania, Bulgaria, excellent examples with failed reforms, successful reforms. We can choose. We can choose and combine. And actually in 2010 when I was participating in political campaign, I was talking to the architects of reforms with Slovaks, Czechs, with Poles who were like Balcerovich, like name escapes me, financial minister of Slovakia, who architected the separation of currencies and then separation of, in general, of property of Czechia and Slovakia, and many others, including Russians, including Andrei Larionov, who was then still more sober-minded than today, and others. I mean sober-minded from economic point of view, because I can understand his emotions today when Russia, his country, is waging the war against Ukraine. You know, we have this experience. I don't think that we have anything to take from Russia. I don't think we have anything that could be useful from Russian experience. Personally, I do admire Russian dissidents, as I mentioned already. I knew many of them, and I think their example of fighting the system is very useful even today, even in Eastern Europe.
Okay, thank you for a very interesting talk and interview. You did a tremendous job. Thank you for coming to us to Civita, and thank you to the audience.
Thank you.